All right, good afternoon. Hey, and welcome to a session called Speaking the Language of Data. This session is part of the research track, and it's designed for people who are relatively new to Tableau. I'm hoping that by the end of this session, I'm going to leave you with two things. The first is what makes Tableau different, i.e., how does the product actually work? And secondly, how does Tableau, the company, actually innovate? So my name is Mrinal, and I'm actually here from Singapore. I actually support customers across Asia in general as a consultant. So what I do is I do problem solving, I do training, product demonstrations, troubleshooting, and oh, sorry, I just noticed the caption there. I thought that was my notes. And I travel all across Asia, and it's a super interesting market to work with because there's such a wide variety of users. I have some users that are highly technical and try to break apart the software, and I have some users that have never actually used spreadsheets and Excel before, and Tableau is the first time that they're coming to grasp with the concept of data. So generally speaking, there's a lot of interesting stories working over there. Also, a personal confession, I'm a bit of a shopaholic. Every time I go on these trips, I will skip one team dinner to actually go and explore the local town and get some local threads. In fact, one of my colleagues caught me on the way back once and took this photo and sent it to like the APAC Slack channel. So, yeah, I do more than just supporting customers, right? Now, every time I do travel, and if any of you have been to Asia, I strongly recommend Bangkok as the best city, right? Hands down, no questions asked, the best city to shop. And every time I do travel there, I always carry with me this phrasebook. It gives me useful phrases like tau rai krap and peng bai, which specifically mean how much and no, that's too expensive, right? So, but recently, when I was there, I got stuck looking for something. Specifically, I was looking for a pocket square. When I used the words pocket and square from the phrasebook, they didn't combine to get me what I was looking for. And that's when I realized that there is a limitation to the extent that you can go when you're using a phrasebook. Because with a phrasebook, you need to know the end result, and you need to work with a finite list of phrases in order to get what you want. Whereas if I happen to know the Thai language, I could much more iteratively get and specify what I was looking for. The Thai language could be mixed and matched, and its characters, its building blocks could be mixed and matched to combine and create songs, books, movies, text messages, websites, etc. And interestingly, the way that Tableau is built, it's built on a patented technology called VizQL. VizQL is a language. It is actually a language with its own grammar and vocabulary that, when combined and mixed and matched, can produce a wide variety of 2D charts, graphs, tables, maps, etc. Now, why does it matter that it's a language? It matters because we'll go back to my story. That one day when I was shopping for the pocket square, you can think of the shopkeeper like the database because she has everything that I want in her store. I just need to specify what I'm looking for. But she speaks her language and I speak mine. So I needed my friend, Pongpat, who is my Thai friend, and he can actually be a translator between us because he can speak both Thai and English and help me get what I want. And by the way, at this point, the shopkeeper's getting really suspicious about like what we're doing there, but she thankfully played along. We told her it's like a tourism ad. So, I mean, go to Bangkok. But anyways, thanks to Pongpat, I'm actually able to get exactly what I want, which is the pocket square. And in fact, Pongpat is just an expert translator as well because he can speak multiple dialects of Thai, northern, southern, central, and similarly, databases themselves have their own dialects. Now, I want to deconstruct what happened here and what happens every time you interact with the software. If you look at a chart like this, and if you think of the y-axis as the intended audience, and you think of the x-axis as highly specific to the opposite, we know that T-SQL or a statement like this will actually fit right there because it's designed for databases and it's highly specific. When you utter that query, you're going to get a singular result. In contrast, English will sit all the way up here because it's designed for humans and can be interpreted in many different ways. Where VizQL sits is right there. It actually can be, it's one level of abstraction away from being as locked down as VizQL actually is, because it can actually work with multiple different databases using that same command that it's trying to execute. But you never actually write VizQL, right? Like you've never actually experienced writing that or asking it to issue commands. What happens is that when you want to go from the highly ambiguous to the specific and try to communicate with the database, you're going to leverage VizQL via the Tableau interface. And what happens is that your right clicks, your drags, your drops, your choice on the pills, the colors, the legends, all of those are you specifying VizQL commands that will then ultimately go to the database as queries, right? Now, so you start with English, and you'll notice that it goes down that spectrum as well, right? Every time you make a choice on the Tableau interface, you're effectively telling Tableau specifically what you're doing, and you're moving from ambiguous to specific. And what happens is you go down that path via VizQL to effectively issue a query to the database, and you'll come back through that same path because what happens is the database will have a result set for what you've asked for example, how much formal apparel we have left, but it'll come back via VizQL, which will act as a translation later into something that you can understand, which is a visualization. So VizQL acts in both ways, both communicating to the database and in interpreting the result back from the database as well. So speaking a language grants you specificity in expression, right? Because you can get exactly what you want. And thanks to Pongpat, I managed to actually buy exactly what I want, which is this pocket square. Now, aside from achieving specificity, speaking the language has other benefits, and that is flexibility. When I say flexibility, I mean that just think about this sentence right here. Speak, language, flexible, express. These are 4 core words that make up the sentence. And I can rearrange those same 4 core words, for example. Speaking is an inflexible means of expressing yourself through language. Same 4 core words, but entirely different sentence and implication, right? And we can see how this idea of flexibility via language can come into action when we're working with data. So, the shopkeeper wants to know, how has the quantity of her pocket squares and formal accessories trended over the past few years? So in this data set, I have, on the left-hand side, I have a few fields, most importantly, quantity and date. So if we need that, we're going to start dragging out the quantity and start dragging out the date field. Now, this is the trends over all categories, but what I'm looking for is specifically the formal accessories. So I'm going to filter this down by subcategory into the formal accessories. All right, so we're zooming into just the pocket squares. And what you'll notice that this is also trending positively over time. We've just been having more and more pocket squares, similar to what we've been having for our overall apparel as well. Now, since we've already answered the question, but we want to just explore this data a bit further and drill down over time, why don't we see what happens when we look at that same date field once again? So we'll look at the date field and drag that same field out. And what we'll notice is that it has, basically Q4 is the highest trending among all these quarters, right? And we'll explore this again by maybe drilling it down one more level, so possibly by month. And here we'll notice that there is actually a peak here. There are some outliers here in November 2018 and November 2015, right? So a lot of volatility for our quantities, but actually most apparent in those 2 months. Let's drill down one more level to the weekly. And once we go down to the weekly level, what's interesting is that you might notice that there is one particular outlier that is not so obvious at the monthly level, but is more obvious at the weekly level, which is the 19th of November, 2017. And if we want to verify that, we can just roll back, go back to the monthly level. And then see that, yeah, it just simply doesn't exist. Maybe there was something that went on in 2017 November that only applied to that week, but not to the rest of the weeks of that month. We can just toggle back and forth just to verify that number, and then maybe explore it a bit later on. All right, so now that we've answered the question of how does this affect us, how does the quantity trend when we drill down from years to quarters to months, I want to know my monthly average quantity on hand because I need to make some predictions for that. So we'll do an average, but instead of looking at it as per year, so among the 4 years, the 12 months each, let's just flip these two variables to look at the per month 4 years. So we'll just rearrange these two fields and look at our monthly average in that way. So here in November, you'll notice that obviously we have those outliers in 2018 and 2015, right? So what we'll do is when we see the monthly average of 153 items, let's zoom in particularly to just 2018 because we want to check if they're outliers, what could be driving these outliers? So you'll notice that when I click on November and I select all of 2018, there is a new average line, which is computed up there. So it's above the global average for November. And if I compare that to all other months, the 2018 is greater than the global average for every single month. So that tells me that 2018 is the tide that lifted all boats, right? We just had a lot of quantity that year. And we'll look at 2015 and do the same thing. But you'll notice something quite different, right? In 2015, the November is greater than the average, but all the other months, it's actually below average. So we really overstocked in November 2015 much more significantly than we normally do. Okay? And so when we're done understanding these outliers and figuring out our data, we probably just want to one last step is just to check for one more hypothesis, which is, are our trends over time affected by other dimensions, like maybe the fabric of our accessories or our suppliers? So we'll just look at our trends over time and throw out the month field. And then just drag in our fabric field. And we'll see that silk, cotton, and linen follow the trends that I was expecting. And even if we do the same thing with supplier, we'll get the trends that we're expecting. So here, we had a hypothesis that was not proven, but that's fine. That's still an insight, right? It doesn't mean that every hypothesis that you explore has to have a new, interesting insight. So we started with one question: how has our quantity trended over the years for formal accessories? And we got that answer. But by dragging in the data, by moving the pills, by rearranging them, we actually got a wider variety of questions and answers, right? And you can play with these same components of the data, the fields, the values, the outliers, just like you would with a language. Now, there's something else that's interesting about the demo that we just saw that I hope you also noticed. I hope you noticed this idea of a feedback loop, right? So whenever we communicate like in person, it's not like I have a paragraph, except for today, it's not like I have a paragraph that I want you to receive and you have a paragraph that I want to receive, right? Normally speaking, we would work with each other. I'd read your gestures and your body language, and we'd modify what we're talking about on the fly. One of the key principles written in the research paper for VizQL is this idea of iterative visual feedback and the necessity of it. So what this means is that every action that a user takes on the interface, even if it's just a simple right click, should produce visual feedback, right? So let's just do a 20-second recap of our first question. Our first question was, how has our quantity trended over the years for formal accessories? So step 1, quantity. Step 2, years. Step 3, filter into formal accessories, right? Now, if you were to use another tool, other or more traditional tools at the time that this paper was written, you'll have to go through 3 steps of dialog boxes to produce this end result, right? And your focus is always on achieving or getting to this same end result. But part of the process here, or part of what was innovative when this paper came out, was this idea that if you keep getting immediate feedback or at every step of the way, step 1 becomes valuable, step 2 becomes valuable, step 3 becomes valuable. And it was. We learned that not just that the trends over time for the accessories is growing, but that is the same as the trends for all other items anyways. So now, speaking of phrasebooks, we do have a small phrasebook built into the platform as well, and that's something called Show Me. Whenever you install Tableau for the first time, you will notice Show Me on the right-hand side. It's designed for beginners to help you get off the ground quickly, right? So in this case, I know the 2 fields that I want, quantity and trends over time, so I'll just basically pick the template and just get started. Whenever I work with users, I actually discourage them from using Show Me after the first time that they get started, because they will and they should start using the canvas so that they can get the kind of specificity and flexibility that I've been demonstrating today so far. Now, based on my experience with other platforms, sometimes it can feel like an entire platform is just a much bigger phrasebook or template, right? In the sense that you have to pull from charts, fit your data into it, and then configure it afterwards, which is a different experience from what you're using today. Now, if I show you, you've all seen probably 2019.3, and some of you who are new have probably seen, even what's been coming in like on Devs on Stage. But just to show you what the Stanford research prototype looked like 16 years ago, right? It's the same data set that I've analyzed across all versions of the software. And of course, we started with a desktop product, right? But today we're more than that. But what happened was, since 2003, we built an entire platform around this desktop product. So we added capabilities that will just match and extend these capabilities as well. Now, it was all built around VizQL, like I said, that analytics, that desktop product, which I mentioned was roughly written 16 years ago. But of course, any language has to evolve, right? Because a language has to evolve, because the world around it that it supports also has to evolve. If we think about 16 years ago, and if we think about 2003, this is what we thought of the internet. Yes, no pain. I thought there'd be a lot more groans of just phone calls that got disconnected. So, anyways, that's how the world has changed since then, right? And if we think about the world of data, database technologies, that world has changed as well. So if we think about popularity, right? OLAP as a database technology reached its peak of popularity in 2003, but has been declining ever since. NoSQL and key value databases had a lot of promise, but never took off as significantly as other database technologies. Hadoop, obviously, everybody's heard of Hadoop, and purely based on like search popularity, reached its peak in 2015, and the cloud has been growing ever since, right? So the idea here is that the world of data has changed so significantly, even in the past 16 years. So let's think about evolution, because even Tableau has to evolve. The way that languages evolve is in 3 distinct ways. You develop dialects, you borrow words from other languages, and you actually develop, or you emerge, a slang will emerge. So what we did in 16 years is that we had to keep updating that language, rewriting it, refactoring it, that VizQL, so that it could adapt to all the different dialects that the world was using, all the different databases and the new technologies that were coming out, how to deal with OLAP differently from SQL, how to deal with flat files, how to deal with JSON files, etc. We also updated it to support the various operating systems that existed in the world, and going from on-premise to cloudy to partly cloudy. Now, speaking of borrowing words, in 2018, we realized that some of the capabilities that people were looking for simply did not emerge naturally from the product and were simply not possible using VizQL. So what we did was we opened up the platform with something called extensions. And what extensions does is that it lets third-party applications live and operate inside the Tableau product as well. So let's look at an example over here. On the left third of this dashboard, what I'm doing is I'm updating the sales quotas for each of my salespeople, and I'm clicking on Submit, which will write to a database. Now, write to database is not something that Tableau as a product or platform intuitively can do, right? Or at least not with VizQL. So that application is embedded inside the dashboard so that the end user doesn't have to necessarily know that it's a different experience or two different applications running at the same time to some extent. And what happens is, after this write to database and update the sales quotas task is finished, the other 2/3 of the dashboard can read from that database and populate the latest sales values. You can use things like parameters, interactivity, etc. And this works in the same way that even in English we'll say sentences that have the word fiance in it, but never really think about the fact that it's not an English word, right? And finally, the final way that languages will evolve is through the emergence of slang. So slang is, by definition, more informal and more casual than languages. So, for example, here's some 2019 slang, something that I admit to using myself. And it's clearly simpler than English if you compare it to like full sentences of English, right? Even though, nobody I know says, alas, I forgot to delete that. But, it's 2019 as well, so yes, I had my friend Pongpat for the sake of the photos, but realistically, I use Google Translate, right? It's just the fastest way for me to actually get what I'm looking for. And you've all seen, to some extent, Ask Data, right? Both in the keynote and in your own experiences as well. So this feature is similar to Google Translate, similar to the idea of a slang, because it's meant to give you the capability to engage with the data in a much more casual and informal way. So I'll tell you what's going on in the background. Every time you type a word, for example, what is the current phrase we're typing right now? What about by quarter? Okay, so what about by quarter? That's the phrase we just typed now. Every word that you type, what about by quarter, it will check if those words are known concepts in the server. So what is a known concept? A concept could be either a field name or a value within a field, or it could be a way that you would think about space or time. So if earlier I had typed the question of trends over time, right, and it defaulted to a line chart, right? Or it could be a word that humans use when typing questions or when engaging with conversations. So right now the example is, okay, so I think I had typed what about by week, right? So the what, the about, these are ways that humans would actually engage with the data. So it'll check for concepts that we know, and it'll use machine learning to identify where that actually fits, right? And then eventually get to a command that can be executed by a computer. Now, how we built this is that we acquired a company called ClearGraph in late 2017 that specialized in doing this level of translation, right? Translating your English phrases in runtime, in real time, into something that can be detected and basically indexed. So what we did with their technology is to integrate it directly into this workflow. So you remember this workflow, right? Going from English to VizQL via the interface to SQL and then back. You're still using VizQL at the end of the day, but you're not going to use the Tableau interface as your method. Instead, there is now a pseudo-language occupying this gap called arclang. And what arclang does is that it occurs, or you'll see it every time you type in a question in Ask Data, right? So here's another example. Show me the discounts across all customers. After translating that using machine learning, arclang is those 3 suggestions at the bottom there. Do you mean sum of discount by customer ID, by customer type, or by customer name, right? And by virtue of you picking one of those options, and by the way, if you don't pick an option, it'll just default to the first one, right? If you just press enter. By virtue of you picking one of those options, you have gone from English to going to a level of specificity that's one level lower, slightly more specific to what you're actually looking for, to something that VizQL can definitively issue as a command, to something that database can actually run as a query, right? So it's the same workflow, but this time you're using arclang as an intermediary body, And what it does is that it funnels the broad possibilities of what you're typing into something that is more specific and that can be issued as a VizQL and then goes through the entire workflow. All right. So now, I mean, we don't know what the next 16 years will look like. This is my projections for databases and database technologies. Even Mark Benioff himself said that, we don't know what Tableau's technology will look like in the next 10 to 16 years, right, during the keynote. But honestly, to all of that, I would say, no pasa nada, or in Thai, I say mai pen rai, which basically means don't worry about it, because at least for the foreseeable future, or at least today, you're able to start speaking the language of data. So thank you. So I ran a little quickly. We're going to have a lot of time for questions after this. Before we actually go into the questions, I just want to leave you with a few slides. So I hope in the past 30 minutes you've been, I've been able to cover how does Tableau work as a platform, but also how does the company innovate. But if you're hungry for more, I want to point you to 2 sessions. The first session is natural language, Ask Data, and other Tableau stories. This was presented yesterday, so you might have to catch it on demand. But it was presented by the amazing Vidya, who's a senior research scientist. And this topic is about natural language processing, not just in Ask Data, but in other parts of the platform as well, right? And if you're already ready to get hands-on, you can look for the second session, which is tomorrow with Ryan. Ryan's also amazing. He's a product manager, but he actually used to be the CTO of ClearGraph, so you're learning from the best, right? You can actually get hands-on right now by completing the session survey in the mobile app. And I can see you're already working on it. And just, if it helps with a little bit of data, there's a correlation between your stars and how likely I am to come back next year. So, and visit the outlet shops here. So, but yeah, I also want to share my contact details because I'm happy to continue the conversation beyond what this topic was about as well. So I'll leave this slide up. Please take a minute to fill up the session survey, and we can just open it up for questions after that.